So Micro Center had 3090 Ti's refurbed, as well as the 3090s, the Founders Edition ones. The Ti was $799, and the regular 3090 was $699, I believe. I've been wanting to get another 3090 Ti or 3090 to make a more potent LLM machine. I currently have one. So today I'm going to be adding in another one so that I can run larger LLMs. That's what it looks like boxed up and refurbed. Comes with the power adapter. And we'll pull the card out. Wonderful. So before I go about transferring this all into a new larger case, I'm just going to test the new card by removing the old one that I have, making sure it works with some image generation stuff. Just quick bench test. This case I actually bought as a fully built computer from a local store here in the New England area called Building 19. It was called a Velocity Micro, and it was a really expensive pre-build, and for some reason their whole shtick was to get things and sell them much cheaper at Building 19. So I've had this case since probably 2008, 2009. It's gone through a large amount of iterations, from mining crypto a long time ago to now doing LLM stuff. So unfortunately today is the last day that this case is going to be my main PC case, which is sad for me. This computer also came with these cool aluminum wheels that you may have seen on newer Apple computers for the price of a whole entire computer, but these were a bit cheaper. Also, I find it now relevant to mention that cable management is not my strong suit, nor something that I pay much care to, so please don't be too hard on me for that. So I'll quickly remove this card, swap it with the new one, and put everything back together. So I have the new card in. Now I will simply plug in the existing wiring that was here. And voila. I'll bring it over to my test bench area and run it just to make sure everything's all right. And then I'll go about transferring all this into a much larger case. Also, side note, if the camera did pan down to a large mess down here on the floor, this is not how I live. This is a workshop, so there's large amounts of trash and machinery and the likes of that. So it's fired up, it's running, and the card has lit up, which is a good sign. So now we're in the Ubuntu environment, and I'm just going to quickly run this to see if the card is being recognized. And it is. We've got our power draw, VRAM, wonderful. So the next step is to run the Open DALI, please correct me if that's an issue, which takes a little while to run. And then we'll open up the web interface so that we can do image generation. Now this is up and I'm going to test it. And of course, this is not why I've gotten a second GPU. This is just a way to quickly just test this one, make sure everything's working all right. All right, let's see. Usually get about that speed on the other card, so that's good. And we'll go over here, we'll run this again just to see if it's being utilized more. Should be around, yep. And the I go to Micro Center Bro picture did work well. Let's make this adhere a bit more, all the way, shall we? And we'll try this one more time, as well as this, while it's generating. Yep, perfect. It's using a lot of power when it does this. I've had them generate some insanely large images, like 4,000 by 4,000. So that picture, the contrast isn't messed up on the camera. It actually looks that messed up. But so the initial test has worked well, and I will now shove 2 cards into a case. I put both of the cards in this case just to see what it will look like. Now this motherboard is only temporarily here. I will eventually soon get a Threadripper with the new motherboard so that the PCI lanes are not bifurcated or bifurcated, I don't know, but because this processor doesn't have enough PCI lanes to run these both in X16. But considering they're gonna have to be this close anyway, which I know is probably horrible from an airflow perspective, I kind of want to just keep them in my case that I'm essentially bonded to until I get a new motherboard and then just totally redo the build. Probably from an engineering standpoint is bad. However, I find that sometimes we look past that to make aesthetic decisions, and I'm no different. So this case, the power supply is mounted up top, which I noticed today after going to Micro Center does not seem to be the norm any longer. It seems like they all get mounted on the bottom, which, based on the size of these, seems a reasonable decision. I am not quite sure if the new one is going to fit in here without sagging massively, so I'll perhaps have to support it some way. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, those are the wrong screws. They're all the right screws now. You can see this computer is aged. I know a lot of people do nice new RGB builds, and I always prefer the more worn out and old aesthetic. And this thing has been around the block, which I like. I like older, worn out things, especially guitars. If you hear fan noise right now, by the way, that's actually one of my light bulbs. I know that sounds weird, but the lighting I'm using, the bulbs have fans in them, and one of them is rather unhappy. All right, I've got that. Just gonna unplug everything, which I should have done. Sorry. I'm just going to reuse the cables that were here, and I will only need to add the additional ones for the extra graphics card. We now have this out. Corsair 1000. It's been a wonderful PSU. Never any problems with it. Oh man, this is of questionable build quality here. My jury rigging. Truth be told, I really wanted to just cut up an old Power Mac G5 case and Frankenstein that into holding both of these graphics cards, but that requires a large amount of aluminum cutting, which I'm not so keen on having to do. Let's check the size difference between the old and new. It actually does not seem as substantial as I first feared. Obviously there. So, and how long is that? 30 millimeters, 40 millimeters. Not too bad. I think we might be all right. So I'll move this off to the side. And I will put this back. Not that way. Not that way. That way. This is perhaps it is a good idea to just use a new case. So these don't go in this. So thread it. Fortunately, my fears of sagging have been quelled due to the fact that this does have some supporting elements of the case frame here and these tabs here and here. So the PSU won't sag. Fortunately, this came with screws because I was trying to put the ones that were in there back in, and I must not have been in my right mind in the last iteration build of this computer because they were completely the wrong size. For PSU. Wonderful. You can't see that. I would lie to you and say I had fully taken this apart so that I could clean the dust from the fans in the front. However, that would be fibbing. I'm taking it apart to get the top of the case off because that will allow me far easier access to the power supply to plug everything back in. I noticed a lot of newer cases and builds seem to have emphasis on ease of use in terms of actually plugging everything in and getting everything wired and cleanliness. So with this off, I now have a large amount of access to put the power supply back in, and really to get everything. I have everything wired up now, including the 2 connectors necessary for the graphics cards. And fortunately, it all worked all right here. This case actually has pretty adequate depth for a larger power supply, including the cords protruding out. So now I'm just going to gently slam this in, and it is sagging a large bit, but it's also not screwed into the back, which gives it some lateral support that way. Please do feel free to shame me for the wiring. I'm going to clean it up a bit before I turn it on, which will just consist of zip tying things to one of these caddies. And now I'm going to test it real quick. I don't actually 100% know if this motherboard is going to be okay with supporting both of these cards from a PCIe standpoint. So I may have to run back out and get a new motherboard, which I'd prefer not to have to do, but if I must, I must. It's all plugged in now. Both cards are on and running. I just have it naked just because I wasn't sure it would work with this motherboard. And you can see here, when I run this, both cards do pop up. So now I'm going to download a large model in the text generation web UI. 70B 4-bit quant. And this will take a little while. About 40 gigabyte download. So, yeah. After a rather large amount of time, I realized that the 70B model would not load. It was saying it was out of memory even though I had the correct amount of video RAM. I needed to increase the size of my swap file. Essentially what that means is, say you have like things on a desk like this and you need more space temporarily, you can move them to shelves and then, you know, move them back. I think that's right. I don't know. Check it on ChatGPT later. So this loaded now, and I transferred everything over to a 512 gig SSD that I had lying around, which was a bit involved of a process. So this is an instruct follow model. Let's see if this actually starts working. Chat instruct, character gallery, this one. And I will say, hello friend. I spelled hello wrong. Let's see what happens. Oh, there, what can I do for you today? 5 tokens a second. I'm not quite sure what the speed is supposed to be for a model of this size. Let me check the Nvidia panel to see what the utilization of the cards is currently. So we have 23 gigs of RAM being used on one and then 19 gigs of the other. So let's just see what this says. Sorry, this is poor to see. Cool, this works pretty well. I think I need to do some cleaning in terms of the response way, because it's actually showing the line breaks in format like that. So that did 17 tokens a second, 16.9. Seems pretty good. I'll run this again to see if the cards are heating up right now, because they are in an open air environment, but this case is very small. So yeah, we're going up a bit. So eventually I'll swap them out of this case when I get a larger motherboard with hopefully a Threadripper. But for now, this is pretty cool. It seems relatively intelligent. Let's ask it one more thing, maybe. Tell me a story about a big micro center trip. And we'll leave this up to its interpretation. Okay, so it does know about a local micro center store. Pretty good. This is definitely much more intelligent than the 7B Dolphin models I was using earlier on the single card. And speed-wise, it's 16 tokens a second. I think I was getting like 50 to 60 on a single 3090 Ti with a 7B EXL2 model. I think that's the word. So, but this is totally readable in real time. You can see it. This has been a pretty fun endeavor so far, just for a simple Saturday. I've got 2 cards in there, which are both likely being suffocated due to the heat of one another. However, this will be a temporary solution. Now all that's left to do is put this case back together and clean up the wiring a bit. Now for the grand reassembly. Now I'm going to quickly just try to tie these cables at least together with the zip ties that were included with the new power supply. One last thing I want to note is that I am just going to use the HDMI port from the motherboard instead of from either of the graphics cards, so that they're not preoccupied with anything other than running what they need to be running. Let's see if this is even possible to do this with any form of cleanliness whatsoever. Again, this will be rebuilt in a new case with proper cable management sometime in the next few months. And there's really not much I can do here. Well, for now, cool with it. Put these back. And final piece of the puzzle will be the side, which could use a Swift ring. some Swiffer pad ASMR. Alright, this needs more than I can give it with that. This on without pinching the cords for the 3090s. And that's it. It's back together. Kind of hard to see both cards in there, but it'll probably look pretty cool. Let me turn this loud one off. There we go. Made no difference. Should look cool on